The story of the samurai empire begins in the late Heian period of Japan, 794 to 1185 AD, a time when political power was officially vested in the imperial court at Heian-kyo, modern Kyoto. In reality, however, authority increasingly shifted to the provinces, where local landholders, responsible for maintaining order and protecting estates, formed armed bands of warriors known as bushi. These early mounted warriors laid the foundation for what would become the samurai class. Among the many clans competing for dominance, two emerged as central actors in Japan's transformation: the Taira, Heike, and Minamoto, Genji. Their rivalry culminated in the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, a decisive civil conflict that determined the trajectory of samurai rule. The Genpei War marked the first large-scale mobilization of samurai as a military class loyal to a clan rather than the court. Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged as the victor, establishing a precedent for military governance over aristocratic rule. Following the war, the emperor appointed Yoritomo as Sei Taishogun in 1192, officially founding the Kamakura Shogunate, the first government led by the samurai. This system formalized feudal hierarchies, wherein loyalty and military service were exchanged for land and privileges, embedding samurai authority into the political structure of Japan. During this period, Japan faced external threats, including two Mongol invasions, 1274 and 1281. While these invasions failed, partly due to typhoons later mythologized as the kamikaze, they imposed significant economic strain on the shogunate, revealing both the strengths and limitations of samurai-led governance. By the 14th century, dissatisfaction among warriors and regional elites led to the fall of the Kamakura Shogunate, 1333. Emperor Go-Daigo attempted to restore imperial rule during the Meiji Restoration, but his policies alienated the samurai, prompting Ashikaga Takauji to seize Kyoto in 1336 and establish the Muromachi, Ashikaga, shogunate. This era combined cultural flourishing, including the rise of Zen temples, no drama, and ink painting, with political fragmentation as regional daimyo consolidated power. By the mid-15th century, succession disputes escalated into the Unin War, 1467 to 1477, a devastating conflict that destroyed Kyoto, and marked the beginning of the Sengoku, or Warring States period, characterized by near-constant warfare among regional warlords. During the Sengoku period, samurai warfare evolved in sophistication and scale. Infantry forces known as a shigeru became central to military campaigns, while the construction of fortified castles and the introduction of Portuguese firearms, tanegashima, in 1543 transformed the nature of combat. Leaders such as Oda Nobunaga, 1568 to 1582, utilized modernized armies and organized tactics to begin the process of national unification, followed by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 1582 to 1600, who completed unification, enforced social stratification, and conducted national land surveys, consolidating the authority of a central military hierarchy. The next transformative phase came with Tokugawa Ieyasu's victory at the Battle of Sekigahara, 1600, and the establishment of the Tokugawa Shogunate, 1603 to 1853. This period, known as the Edo era, brought over 2 centuries of peace and stability. The shogunate implemented policies such as senkinkotai, requiring daimyo to alternate residence between their domains, and Edo, and enforced isolationist policies, sakoku, that limited foreign trade to Dutch and Chinese merchants at Nagasaki. Samurai, once warriors by necessity, became bureaucrats, administrators, and moral exemplars, sustaining hierarchical authority while contributing to economic growth, urban culture, education, and the arts. During the Edo period, the samurai ethos was codified in Bushidō, emphasizing loyalty, honor, courage, self-discipline, and ethical conduct. Philosophers and writers such as Yamaga Soko and Yamamoto Tsunetomo shaped the moral framework of the samurai, blending Confucian and Zen ideals with practical guidance for administration and social behavior. Even as martial duties waned, Bushido maintained samurai identity and provided a moral compass for the governance and social order of Japan. The Samurai Empire's centuries-long dominance ended with the arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's black ships in 1853, which exposed the military and technological weakness of the Tokugawa Shogunate. Unequal treaties with Western powers, combined with internal political and economic pressures, destabilized the shogunate. Reformist domains such as Satsuma and Chashu, in alliance with imperial loyalists, led the Boshin War, 1868 to 1869, resulting in the resignation of Tokugawa Yoshinobu and the formal restoration of imperial rule under Emperor Meiji. This transition initiated the Meiji Restoration, abolished samurai privileges, and modernized Japan along Western military, political, and economic lines. Despite the dissolution of their formal social status, the samurai left an enduring legacy. Bushido principles, administrative expertise, military discipline, and cultural contributions persisted within the new Meiji state, shaping the development of modern Japanese society, military organization, governance, and national identity. The Samurai Empire, while no longer politically dominant, continued to influence Japan through its ethical and institutional heritage, demonstrating the profound impact of the warrior class over nearly 7 centuries of Japanese history. This documentary history will cover the entire history of the Samurai Empire. Before the rise of the samurai as a dominant military and political force, Japan was a nation governed largely by the imperial court, centered in Heian, the city now known as Kyoto. The Heian period, which began in 794 AD when Emperor Kemu moved the capital from Nara, established a court culture that prized elegance, poetry, and bureaucratic sophistication. Aristocratic families, particularly the Fujiwara clan, dominated governance by marrying into the imperial family, controlling regency offices, and managing appointments across the provinces. In theory, the emperor retained supreme authority over the country, but in practice, power was often exercised indirectly through these aristocratic families. This court-centered model emphasized ceremonial hierarchy, literary accomplishment, and ritual, yet it was ill-equipped to enforce authority over distant provinces. By the late 10th and 11th centuries, Japan's political and economic landscape had begun to shift. The central government faced increasing difficulties in collecting taxes, administering justice, and defending rural areas. Large estates known as shon emerged, granted by the court or temples and exempt from imperial taxation. These estates were often controlled by powerful landholding families or religious institutions, and they relied on armed guards to protect their wealth and property. Over time, these guards evolved into mounted warriors who came to be known as bushi, the early samurai. Unlike the aristocrats of Kyoto, the bushi derived their authority from martial skill, loyalty to local lords, and the ability to enforce order in areas beyond the effective reach of the court. The social and political conditions that fostered the rise of the bushi were compounded by frequent local conflicts, disputes over land inheritance, and rivalries among provincial families. Japan's mountainous terrain and scattered population centers made centralized control difficult, and regional strongmen increasingly asserted autonomy. In response, aristocratic estates began to maintain permanent armed forces. These forces were initially small and focused on defending estate boundaries, collecting taxes, and suppressing banditry. But as the 11th century progressed, these warrior bands became more organized and professionalized, developing the early structures and codes that would later characterize samurai culture. By the mid-11th century, two clans had emerged as preeminent military powers: the Taira, Heike, and the Minamoto, Genji. The Taira, based primarily in western Honshu, gained influence at court through military service, strategic marriages, and alliances with the Fujiwara regents. The Minamoto, traditionally associated with the eastern provinces of Japan, maintained a strong warrior culture and cultivated a reputation for loyalty and martial prowess. Both clans were descended from imperial lineage, a practice designed by the court to integrate peripheral branches of the imperial family into governance, while keeping them subordinate to the central authority. This status gave both families legitimacy and access to court appointments, but it also fueled competition for prestige, lands, and influence. The rivalry between the Taira and Minamoto intensified during the late 11th century. A critical flashpoint occurred in 1156 with the Shogun Rebellion, a brief civil war in which rival factions of the imperial family fought for succession, and both clans mobilized armed forces to support different sides. While the conflict was short-lived, it demonstrated that the court relied heavily on these provincial warriors to enforce authority. The Taira emerged with the upper hand, and the Minamoto influence in Kyoto temporarily declined. Only 2 decades later, the Heiji Rebellion of 1160 saw the Taira decisively crush the Minamoto in another struggle over control of the capital and the court. These early conflicts signaled a fundamental shift: military force, rather than bureaucratic status or ceremonial authority, would increasingly determine political power in Japan. During this period, the term samurai began to take shape as a designation for those warriors who served aristocratic households and regional lords. The early samurai were not yet the independent elite class that would dominate Japan for centuries. They were retainers, bound by personal loyalty and duty to their employers. Their obligations included armed service, estate management, and the enforcement of order. Over time, the bushi developed specialized skills in archery, horseback riding, and swordsmanship, as well as a code of conduct emphasizing honor, discipline, and loyalty to one's lord. These values would later crystallize into what historians recognize as the foundation of Bushidō, the samurai way. Economically, the rise of the samurai was tied to the increasing decentralization of land control. The Shogun system created wealth concentrated in local estates, while imperial taxation and administration became more tenuous. Warrior families were able to assert control over these estates, collecting revenue and raising private armies. This economic independence allowed samurai to act with considerable autonomy, even while nominally serving the court or powerful aristocratic families. By the late 12th century, the Taira and Minamoto had built complex networks of vassals and retainers, forming the structural backbone of the samurai political military system. Culturally, the Heian period left its imprint on these early warriors. While the Bushi were fundamentally martial in orientation, they were also influenced by courtly aesthetics and ritual. Literacy, poetry, and ceremonial knowledge were valued, particularly among elite samurai families seeking recognition at the court. At the same time, Buddhist institutions played a dual role, both sponsoring and sometimes opposing samurai power. Monasteries maintained their own armed monks, and conflicts over land or political influence frequently drew samurai into confrontation with religious authorities. By 1180, the stage was set for a profound transformation. Emperor Takakura's reign had been marked by political instability, and Prince Machihito, a claimant to the throne, issued a call to arms against the dominant Taira clan. This appeal mobilized Minamoto forces and their allies in what became the Genpei War, a conflict that would last 5 years and permanently shift the balance of power from the aristocratic court to the emerging warrior class. The period leading up to this war represents the final phase of court-dominated Japan and the emergence of the samurai as the central actors in Japanese politics, society, and military affairs. The Genpei War, fought between 1180 and 1185, marked the definitive beginning of the samurai's political and military dominance in Japan. The conflict arose from a complex combination of imperial succession disputes, aristocratic rivalries, and the rising power of provincial warrior clans. The two main combatants were the Taira clan, also known as the Haika, and the Minamoto clan, or Genji. The war not only determined which clan would dominate the imperial court and the provinces, but also laid the foundations for centuries of samurai rule. The immediate trigger of the Genpei War was the claim of Prince Machihito, a son of Emperor Go-Shirakawa, to the imperial throne. In 1180, the Taira controlled the court under the leadership of Taira no Kayamori, who had effectively become the power behind the emperor through a combination of political influence and military strength. Machihito, perceiving the Taira as usurpers of rightful authority and supported by the court aristocracy dissatisfied with Kayamori, issued a call to arms directed at the Minamoto clan. Minamoto leaders, particularly Minamoto no Yoritamo, who had been exiled to the eastern provinces after earlier conflicts with the Taira, answered this call and began mobilizing forces from Kamakura in eastern Honshu. The war unfolded over 5 years and involved multiple regions of Japan, highlighting the decentralized nature of political and military authority at the time. In the early stages, the Taira held the advantage in numbers, resources, and proximity to Kyoto. They controlled key strongholds and had loyal retainers positioned throughout central Japan. Nevertheless, the Minamoto leveraged their knowledge of the eastern provinces, their ability to raise local militias, and strategic alliances with smaller warrior families who resented Taira dominance. This regional mobilization was critical in establishing the Minamoto as a credible challenge to the central authority. The first significant confrontation occurred at the Battle of Uji in 1180. Prince Machihito and Minamoto allies attempted to rally support in the capital region, but Taira forces quickly advanced. The battle is notable for the tactical use of the Uji River as a defensive barrier, with Minamoto warriors famously attempting to dismantle the bridges to impede the Taira advance. Despite this effort, the Taira overwhelmed the defenders, forcing Machihito to flee. He was eventually captured and executed, demonstrating the lethal stakes of samurai warfare and the Taira's initial supremacy. After this setback, Minamoto no Yoritomo consolidated power in the east. He cultivated alliances with local governors and warrior families, building a disciplined military structure capable of coordinated campaigns across multiple provinces. The Minamoto strategy combined both offensive and defensive operations. They harassed Taira supply lines, secured control of strategic passes, and captured smaller fortifications. This incremental approach allowed them to gradually erode Taira dominance without facing the full force of the central clan in a single decisive battle. One of the key turning points came in 1184 at the Battle of Ichinotani. Minamoto forces, under the leadership of Minamoto no Yoshitsune, executed a daring assault on the Taira stronghold at Ichinotani, located near present-day Kobe. Yoshitsune's forces attacked from multiple directions, including a steep mountain approach that the Taira had assumed impassable. The tactical ingenuity and speed of the Minamoto assault led to the destruction of the Taira garrison, capturing key members of the clan and forcing the remainder to retreat. This victory demonstrated the evolving sophistication of samurai military strategy, including the use of terrain, surprise, and coordinated maneuvers. The final and decisive confrontation of the Genpei War occurred at the Battle of Dan-no-Ura on April 25, 1185, in the Kanmon Straits between Honshu and Kyushu. The battle was a naval engagement, reflecting the strategic importance of waterways in medieval Japanese warfare. The Taira, cornered and heavily outnumbered, attempted to regroup and fight a defensive battle. Minamoto commanders employed both traditional naval tactics and psychological warfare, including bribing or persuading Taira allies to defect. The outcome was catastrophic for the Taira. The young emperor and Toku, a Taira member, drowned. Legend says he was carried into the sea with the imperial regalia, while most of the remaining Taira warriors were killed or committed suicide to avoid capture. This defeat eliminated the Taira as a political and military force, leaving the Minamoto clan in undisputed control. The consequences of the Genpei War were profound and long-lasting. With the Taira eliminated, Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged as the preeminent power broker in Japan. While the emperor remained the symbolic head of state in Kyoto, real authority shifted to the military leadership. In 1192, Yoritomo would be appointed Seii Taishogun by the court, formalizing the political supremacy of the samurai class. The war also set precedents for samurai governance. Loyalty to a military lord, strategic coordination of provincial forces, and disciplined martial conduct became central to political and military life. Moreover, the Genpei War fostered the development of military culture, including the codification of combat skills, mounted archery, and swordsmanship, which would define samurai identity for centuries. Culturally, the Genpei War inspired both historical records and literary traditions. Chronicles such as the Heike Monogatari captured the exploits of warriors, the rise and fall of clans, and the tragic consequences of warfare, blending historical events with moral and philosophical reflections on impermanence and honor. These narratives reinforced the values that would later be associated with Bushidō, emphasizing courage, loyalty, and the inevitability of change in the life of a warrior. The Minamoto victory also reshaped the administrative structure of Japan. Kamakura, in the eastern provinces, became the seat of military governance, establishing a dual structure in which the emperor and court in Kyoto retained ceremonial authority while the shogunate exercised practical control over land, taxation, and military affairs. This arrangement created the prototype for feudal Japan, in which the samurai, rather than court officials, became the principal enforcers of political order. Land stewardship, military service, and hierarchical loyalty became the basis of governance, forming the early feudal framework that would endure through subsequent shogunates. The conclusion of the Genpei War in 1185 marked the end of Terra dominance and the beginning of a fundamental transformation in Japanese governance. The Minamoto clan, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo, emerged as the dominant military power. While the emperor in Kyoto retained symbolic authority, Yoritomo's control over the provinces and the samurai class established a new form of government, the Kamakura shogunate. The period from 1192 to 1333 represents the first sustained era of samurai-led rule, introducing feudal institutions that would define Japan for centuries. In 1192, following years of consolidating military authority in eastern Japan, Minamoto no Yoritomo was officially appointed Sei, Taishogun, by Emperor Go-Toba. The title, meaning commander-in-chief of the expeditionary force against the barbarians, was originally a military designation for campaigns in northern Honshu, but under Yoritomo, it became the foundation of a centralized military government. Yoritomo did not displace the emperor. Instead, he created a dual system in which Kyoto maintained ritual and symbolic authority, while Kamakura exercised practical control over land, taxation, and judicial affairs. This bifurcated system allowed Yoritomo to assert dominance without directly challenging the legitimacy of the imperial institution, a key factor in maintaining political stability during the early shogunate. Kamakura, strategically located on the eastern coast of Honshu, became the administrative center of the shogunate. Its location offered both defensibility and access to the eastern provinces, where many Minamoto allies and vassals were based. Yoritomo established a network of military governors and stewards, Jidō and Shugo, to oversee estates across Japan. The Jidō were responsible for local estate management, tax collection, and enforcing order, while the Shugo acted as provincial constables, maintaining military readiness and loyalty to the shogunate. This hierarchical system allowed Yoritomo to extend authority into regions where central imperial power had previously been weak or symbolic. The shogunate's consolidation relied heavily on a combination of patronage and disciplined vassalage. Yoritomo cultivated loyalty among the samurai by granting land rights and titles in exchange for military service. The early Kamakura government thus formalized what had already begun in the late Heian period. The notion that military service and loyalty to a lord could grant status, wealth, and influence. This arrangement transformed local warriors from loosely organized militia into a structured feudal hierarchy. Clans pledged allegiance to the shogun rather than solely to local aristocrats, creating a centralized military authority that could enforce nationwide policy. After Yoritomo died in 1199, the shogunate entered a new phase of administration dominated by the Hojo clan, his in-laws. Hojo Tokumasa, Yoritomo's father-in-law, became the first shikin, or regent, effectively controlling the shogunate while maintaining the nominal authority of the shogun. The regency system became a hallmark of Kamakura governance, balancing the interests of powerful families while maintaining continuity of authority. The Hojo clan's rule emphasized institutional stability, legal codification, and the maintenance of military readiness, rather than direct battlefield leadership. One of the most notable challenges to the Kamakura shogunate occurred during the Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281. The Mongol Empire, having conquered China and Korea, sought to expand into Japan. The first invasion in 1274 involved a fleet carrying tens of thousands of troops and their Korean and Chinese auxiliaries. The Kamakura forces, under the command of the shogunate, met the Mongols in Kyushu. Despite the Mongols' superior numbers and organization, the Japanese defenders utilized fortifications, coastal defense strategies, and familiarity with the terrain to repel the invaders. A typhoon struck the Mongol fleet, sinking many ships, an event later mythologized as the kamikaze, or divine wind. The second invasion in 1281 was even larger, with estimates of over 140,000 troops. The Kamakura samurai constructed defensive walls along the coastline and coordinated local militias, again relying on their mobility, discipline, and intimate knowledge of the land. A typhoon struck once more, decimating the Mongol fleet and ending the immediate threat. These invasions demonstrated both the shogunate's organizational capabilities and the vulnerability of Japan to external threats. They also imposed a severe economic burden. Maintaining military readiness, fortifications, and provincial forces required significant resources, straining the Kamakura economy and contributing to long-term administrative difficulties. The Kamakura period also witnessed the early development of legal and administrative institutions specific to samurai governance. The Gozaibai Shikamoku, established in 1232 under Hojo Yasutoki, codified laws for disputes among the warrior class, particularly concerning land rights, inheritance, and vassal obligations. This legal framework formalized expectations of loyalty and service, reducing arbitrary violence and clarifying the relationship between samurai and their lords. It was one of the first samurai-centric legal codes, reflecting the shift from court-dominated justice to military-based governance. Religion and culture during the Kamakura shogunate were also shaped by the rise of the warrior class. While Zen Buddhism, imported from China, gained popularity among samurai for its emphasis on discipline and meditation, Pure Land Buddhism offered spiritual solace to a broader population during times of political unrest. Temples often received protection from samurai patrons, who in return could legitimize their authority and gain religious prestige. This period also saw the growth of military tales and chronicles, recording heroic deeds and battles, which would later influence samurai ethos and literature. Despite these institutional developments, the Kamakura shogunate faced recurring internal challenges. Factional disputes, succession crises, and rebellion occasionally threatened stability. Yet, The structure established by Yoritomo and refined by the Hojo regents allowed the shogunate to endure for over a century. The emphasis on decentralized administration, vassal loyalty, and codified law created a resilient system capable of withstanding both internal dissent and external threats. The Kamakura shogunate, established by Minamoto no Yoritomo in 1192 and stabilized under the Hojo regents, endured for over a century as the first samurai-led government in Japan. However, by the early 14th century, its foundations were increasingly fragile. Political tension, economic strain, and growing dissatisfaction among warrior families set the stage for a dramatic collapse. The years 1333 to 1336 marked the fall of Kamakura and the brief attempt to restore imperial rule under Emperor Go-Daigo, known as the Meiji Restoration, a pivotal period that reshaped Japan's political landscape and the role of the samurai. The Kamakura shogunate's weaknesses were partly structural. The Hojo regency system concentrated power in the hands of a single clan while limiting the autonomy of other warrior families. As the years passed, resentment grew among regional samurai who had been denied rewards or land rights promised for their service. Moreover, the shogunate's reliance on rigid inheritance practices and centralized control over appointments created internal friction. Coupled with the economic strain caused by defense obligations, particularly following the Mongol invasions, the system became brittle. Samurai and local lords increasingly questioned the legitimacy of Hojo rule, especially as court authority in Kyoto, though symbolic, remained influential in shaping perceptions of political legitimacy. Emperor Go-Daigo, who ascended the throne in 1318, capitalized on this dissatisfaction. Unlike his predecessors, Go-Daigo was determined to reassert imperial authority over Japan. He actively sought alliances with discontented samurai and provincial lords, promising rewards and positions in a restored imperial government. This strategy resonated with those frustrated by Hojo dominance, creating a coalition that would challenge the shogunate directly. Go-Daigo's vision was not merely symbolic. He intended to restructure the governance of Japan, diminishing the power of regents and returning effective control to the imperial court. The rebellion against Kamakura began in earnest in 1331 when Go-Daigo attempted to assert his authority, an effort later called the Genko War. The initial uprising was suppressed by the Hojo, and Go-Daigo was captured and exiled to the remote Oki Islands. However, the attempt inspired further resistance. Regional warrior families, particularly those aligned with the Minamoto legacy, refused to recognize Hojo authority entirely. Among the most notable leaders was Ashikaga Takauji, a general initially loyal to the shogunate, but who would later become its most formidable opponent. Takauji recognized both the political opportunity and the widespread discontent among samurai, which offered a path to elevate his own power while ostensibly supporting the emperor. By 1333, Takauji and other disaffected warriors mobilized forces against the Kamakura shogunate. The campaign advanced systematically from the eastern provinces toward Kamakura itself, exploiting the shogunate's weakened military and fracturing alliances. The shogunate's defenses, once formidable, proved inadequate against the coordinated attack of loyalist samurai who had intimate knowledge of local terrain and strong motivation to overthrow Hojo rule. The final confrontation culminated in the siege of Kamakura, a strategically significant coastal city and the shogunate's administrative center. Samurai forces scaled the walls, breached defenses and effectively overwhelmed the Hojo loyalists. The fall of Kamakura was swift and decisive. On July 4th, 1333, Hojo Nakatoki, the last regent, committed ritual suicide, seppuku, along with much of his family and close retainers. This act was emblematic of samurai culture, emphasizing honor and loyalty even in defeat. With the collapse of Hojo leadership, the Kamakura shogunate ceased to exist. Samurai control over governance did not vanish, but the locus of power shifted temporarily toward the imperial court under Go-Daigo. Following the fall of Kamakura, Go-Daigo initiated the Meiji Restoration, 1333 to 1336, a three-year attempt to reassert imperial rule. The restoration sought to reverse the centuries of samurai political dominance, re-establishing court control over land distribution, taxation, and military command. Go-Daigo issued policies aiming to reward loyal warriors, restructure administration, and centralize authority. He sought to reconcile the competing interests of provincial lords, court aristocrats, and samurai, attempting to integrate the military class into a unified imperial framework. Despite its ambitious vision, the Meiji Restoration faced immediate challenges. Many samurai, particularly those who had fought under Yoritomo's system, expected generous rewards of land and status for their service. Go-Daigo, adhering to traditional courtly practices and influenced by aristocratic advisors, often failed to fulfill these expectations. Key figures, such as Ashikaga Takauji, were given insufficient recognition relative to their military contributions. Discontent grew among the very warriors who had helped restore imperial authority, creating an unstable political environment. Takauji, sensing both opportunity and dissatisfaction among his peers, rebelled against Go-Daigo. In 1336, he marched on Kyoto, forcing the emperor to flee to Yoshino in southern Japan. Takauji established the Ashikaga shogunate, also known as the Muromachi shogunate, positioning himself as a military leader while maintaining nominal allegiance to the emperor. This act marked the effective end of the Meiji Restoration. Although Go-Daigo continued to claim legitimacy from his temporary court in Yoshino, his authority was limited, and the division between northern and southern courts, the Nambokucho period, ensued. The fall of Kamakura and the failure of the Meiji Restoration had lasting consequences. The brief resurgence of imperial rule demonstrated the symbolic power of the emperor, but also reinforced the practical necessity of samurai-led governance. Political authority in Japan henceforth would require the integration of military leadership with court legitimacy. The episode also illustrated the importance of reward structures and the management of warrior expectations. Ignoring these factors could, and did, undermine even a successful military rebellion. Culturally, this period solidified the samurai's emerging identity as both military and political actors. The strategic use of loyalty, coalition building, and decisive action during the fall of Kamakura exemplified the values that would later be central to the samurai ethos. Simultaneously, the Meiji Restoration reflected the enduring influence of court traditions, including ritual, bureaucracy, and ceremonial authority, which continued to shape samurai governance under the Ashikaga shogunate. Economically, the transition highlighted the challenges of sustaining military rule. The cost of raising armies, fortifying positions, and maintaining political dominance placed a significant strain on provincial resources. Samurai leaders had to balance immediate military needs with long-term governance and estate management, a tension that would recur in later periods of Japanese history, particularly during the Sengoku era of warring states. The Muromachi shogunate, also known as the Ashikaga shogunate, was established in 1336 by Ashikaga Takauji following the collapse of the short-lived Meiji Restoration. Unlike the Kamakura shogunate, which had centralized military authority in the eastern provinces, the Ashikaga regime operated from Kyoto and sought a closer integration with the imperial court, though real power rested firmly with the samurai. This period, spanning nearly 250 years, was marked by political fragmentation, cultural flourishing, and the gradual decentralization of authority to regional daimyo, laying the groundwork for the later warring states era. The immediate challenge for Ashikaga Takauji was consolidating power while legitimizing his authority. The Meiji Restoration had demonstrated the difficulty of asserting central control without adequately rewarding samurai loyalty. Takauji cleverly positioned himself as both a defender of the imperial institution and a military leader, establishing the Ashikaga shogunate in Kyoto while maintaining nominal respect for Emperor Go-Daigo. The resulting political structure allowed Takauji to exercise military and administrative authority without directly challenging the emperor's symbolic status. This dual system became a defining feature of Muromachi governance, balancing ceremonial legitimacy with samurai power. Early in the Muromachi period, Japan was split between two rival imperial courts: the Northern Court, supported by the Ashikaga in Kyoto, and the Southern Court, loyal to Go-Daigo in Yoshino. This division, known as the Nanbo Kacho period, 1336 to 1392, resulted in intermittent warfare, shifting alliances, and political instability. Both sides sought support from samurai clans and provincial governors, offering land, titles, and protection in exchange for military service. The conflict underscored the increasing importance of regional power and the necessity for samurai to navigate complex networks of loyalty. Ultimately, the Northern Court prevailed, and the Southern Court was absorbed, though the struggle illustrated the enduring fragility of centralized authority in Japan. Despite political instability, the Muromachi period saw remarkable cultural and intellectual growth. Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, shogun from 1368 to 1394, exemplified the synthesis of military and cultural patronage. Under his rule, Kyoto became a center of Zen-inspired architecture, ink painting, and garden design. Zen monasteries flourished, promoting meditation and disciplined aesthetic practice that appealed to samurai ideals of focus and self-control. The period also witnessed the rise of no theater, refined tea ceremonies, and the codification of artistic traditions that blended courtly sophistication with samurai values. These cultural developments reinforced the social authority of the shogunate, providing legitimacy beyond military power alone. Politically, the Ashikaga shogunate relied on a decentralized system of governance. Regional daimyo retained significant autonomy over their territories, managing local armies, taxation, and judicial affairs. The shogunate's authority depended on a combination of military oversight, strategic marriages, and political negotiation rather than direct administration. This decentralization created both opportunities and challenges. While local lords could innovate and defend their domains effectively, their growing independence weakened central control and planted the seeds for the prolonged civil conflicts of the Sengoku period. The Muromachi shogunate also implemented administrative reforms to maintain order. Ashikaga leaders appointed provincial constables, shugo, to oversee military and judicial matters, and local samurai families were organized into networks of loyalty and obligation. Land disputes, taxation, and military service obligations were codified in various regional agreements, though enforcement often depended on the personal authority and charisma of individual shugo. Legal codes and protocols from the Kamakura period, such as the Gozaibai Shikamoku, influenced Muromachi administration, providing continuity in governance despite the political turbulence. Economic developments during the Muromachi period reflected the interplay between samurai administration and commercial growth. Urban centers, particularly Kyoto, Osaka, and Sakai, became hubs of trade and artisanal production. Merchant families accumulated wealth and influence, although they remained subordinate to samurai authority. The expansion of markets, combined with agricultural improvements and regional autonomy, allowed daimyo to finance armies and fortifications independently of the shogunate. This economic dynamism, while strengthening local power, also contributed to the erosion of centralized control. Warfare during the Muromachi period evolved in response to political decentralization. Samurai were no longer strictly mobilized by a central authority. Instead, regional conflicts, succession disputes, and rivalries among daimyo became the primary drivers of military action. Fortified castles began to dominate the landscape, replacing the earlier reliance on temporary encampments and simple fortifications. The period also saw the increasing use of professional infantry alongside mounted warriors, a development that would later accelerate during the Sengoku period. Tactical innovation, logistical planning, and strategic alliances became as important as individual valor in determining military success. Religion remained intertwined with political authority. Zen Buddhism, influential among the warrior elite, encouraged discipline, meditation, and cultural engagement. Simultaneously, Pure Land and Tendai sects maintained significant estates and influence, often acting as both patrons and adversaries of samurai families. Monastic armies occasionally intervened in conflicts, compelling samurai to navigate complex relationships with religious institutions while asserting territorial control. The Ashikaga shogunate's patronage of temples and monasteries strengthened its symbolic legitimacy, even as practical authority remained contested in the provinces. The later Muromachi period was increasingly defined by political fragmentation. Successive shoguns lacked the authority and charisma of Takauji or Yoshimitsu, and the central court struggled to enforce compliance among ambitious daimyo. By the mid-15th century, tensions over succession, land rights, and regional dominance culminated in the Unin War, 1467 to 1477, which devastated Kyoto and marked the beginning of the Sengoku, or Warring States period. Although the Muromachi shogunate technically persisted, its authority was effectively symbolic, with real power vested in autonomous regional lords. This transition highlighted the limitations of a shogunate that relied on negotiation and patronage rather than centralized enforcement. By the mid-15th century, the Ashikaga shogunate, despite its cultural achievements and symbolic authority, had become increasingly fragile. Shoguns struggled to assert control over powerful regional daimyo, who had grown accustomed to autonomy and wealth. This tension culminated in the Unin War, 1467 to 1477, a succession dispute within the shogunate that escalated into a nationwide conflict and marked the beginning of the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period, a century of near-constant civil war, shifting alliances, and the rise of independent warlords. The Unin War began as a contest over shogunate succession following the death of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's designated heir. Competing factions emerged, each supported by different daimyo families and samurai coalitions. On one side were the Hosokawa clan, aligned with Ashikaga Yoshimi, the shogun's brother, and on the other side the Yamana clan, supporting a different claim. While the initial dispute centered on court politics and succession rights, the conflict quickly drew in numerous regional lords, each seizing the opportunity to advance their own territorial ambitions. The result was a full-scale civil war, devastating the capital city of Kyoto and effectively paralyzing the central authority. Kyoto, the cultural and political heart of Japan, suffered catastrophic destruction. The city's temples, palaces, and residences were burned or looted, and the population was decimated. Many samurai who participated in the war used the chaos to settle local scores or expand influence, blurring the distinction between political loyalty and personal ambition. The shogunate itself failed to enforce discipline or coordinate the warring factions, revealing the limitations of Ashikaga central authority. By the war's conclusion in 1477, the shogunate had survived in name only. Kyoto lay in ruins, and Japan was fragmented into hundreds of domains ruled by autonomous daimyo. The onset of the Sengoku period that followed the Unin War represented a profound shift in Japanese politics and society. Central authority collapsed, and regional lords assumed near-total control over their territories. Daimyo fortified castles, raised personal armies, and developed administrative systems to govern their lands independently of the shogunate. Samurai, previously tied to hierarchical loyalty under the shogun, became vassals to powerful local lords. Warfare became a regular feature of life, as alliances shifted rapidly and battles were fought to secure territory, resources, and prestige. The political landscape was fluid and dangerous, requiring constant vigilance, strategic acumen, and martial skill. The decentralization of power during the Sengoku period also accelerated military innovation. Castles evolved from simple fortifications into complex defensive strongholds designed to withstand prolonged sieges. Samurai armies became more organized and diversified. While mounted warriors remained important, a shigeru, or foot soldiers armed with spears and later firearms, grew in prominence. Leaders experimented with unit coordination, logistics, and battlefield strategy, laying the foundation for the mass armies of the late 16th century. The period also saw the first significant introduction of firearms from Europe, beginning with Portuguese traders in 1543, which would later revolutionize samurai warfare. Economically, the Sengoku period forced daimyo to develop self-sufficient domains. Agricultural productivity, tax collection, and resource management were critical to funding armies and fortifications. Merchant networks expanded, facilitating trade within and between domains. Economic control became inseparable from military power, as wealth enabled lords to maintain troops, pay retainers, and secure alliances. Social structures solidified around these domains. Samurai were bound to lords by loyalty and land grants. Peasants worked the land under increasingly regulated conditions, and artisans and merchants supported both the economic and military infrastructure. The Sengoku period also highlighted the interplay between religion and politics. Buddhist monasteries, particularly the militant warrior monks, Sohei, maintained armed forces and controlled significant territories. These monastic armies often intervened in conflicts, siding with or against daimyo based on local interests. Shogun and regional samurai had to negotiate or neutralize these religious powers to maintain control, further complicating the political landscape. Temples that survived the Unin War often became centers of economic and cultural influence, maintaining connections with warrior elites who sought spiritual legitimacy alongside martial power. Leadership during this period required both strategic skill and political dexterity. Daimyo navigated a volatile environment through marriages, hostage-taking, and carefully calibrated alliances. Loyalty was personal rather than institutional. Samurai could switch allegiances if rewards or survival dictated. The fragmentation of authority meant that individual initiative, battlefield competence, and administrative ability determined success more than hereditary position. This environment cultivated a new breed of samurai leaders, capable of unifying territories and imposing order amid chaos. Figures such as Oda Nobunaga, who would later emerge as the first of Japan's unifiers. The Unin War and subsequent warring states period had profound cultural implications as well. Despite, or perhaps because of, the constant warfare, arts and culture adapted. Castles became not only military centers, but also hubs of learning and patronage. Samurai began to adopt literate and administrative skills, balancing martial duties with governance. The period also saw increased patronage of Noh theater, ink painting, and Zen gardens, reflecting the enduring influence of Muromachi cultural achievements even amid conflict. Cultural sophistication coexisted with military necessity, illustrating the dual nature of samurai society as both martial and cultured. By 1568, the end of the Sengoku period was approaching with the rise of Oda Nobunaga, who entered Kyoto and began the process of national unification. His military innovations, strategic vision, and ruthless consolidation of power marked a new phase in Japanese history. However, the century of fragmentation between 1467 and 1568 had already transformed the samurai class, refining its military capabilities, administrative expertise, and political acumen. The patterns established during the Warring States period, regional autonomy, fortified strongholds, and professional armies, would define Japanese warfare and governance for decades to come. The Warring States period, beginning in the mid-15th century, was an era of intense conflict and rapid innovation for the Samurai Empire. Continuous warfare among rival daimyo forced adaptations in strategy, tactics, and technology. Samurai leadership evolved to meet the demands of large-scale battles, the defense of fortified domains, and the integration of new weapons. By the 16th century, Japan was experiencing a revolution in military organization that would transform samurai society and set the stage for eventual unification. One of the most significant developments was the shift from small-scale mounted combat to organized infantry units. Traditionally, samurai warfare had emphasized the individual prowess of mounted warriors, who fought on horseback with bows, swords, and lances. While these elite warriors remained important, the scale of Sengoku conflicts required larger armies and coordinated tactics. Foot soldiers, known as a shigeru, became increasingly central to military campaigns. Initially drawn from peasant populations, a shigeru were organized into units equipped with spears, yari, swords, katana or tachi, and, later, firearms. They were disciplined under samurai commanders, forming the backbone of the new battlefield structure. Fortifications also evolved dramatically during this period. Castles became central to military strategy, replacing the simple hilltop forts and fortified manor houses of earlier centuries. Designed to withstand prolonged sieges and defend key territory, these castles combined defensive walls, moats, and watchtowers. The layouts often leveraged natural terrain for advantage, and complex gate systems and inner baileys forced attackers into choke points. Examples of early Sengoku castles include Azuchi Castle, built by Oda Nobunaga, which combined military strength with administrative and cultural functions. Castles became not only military centers, but also symbols of authority, projecting power over surrounding lands and populations. The arrival of Europeans in the mid-16th century introduced a revolutionary element to samurai warfare: firearms. In 1543, Portuguese traders landed on Tanegashima Island, bringing matchlock arquebus, which the Japanese quickly adopted and improved. Known locally as Tanegashima, these firearms allowed infantry to engage in volleys that could disrupt cavalry charges and alter the dynamics of siege warfare. Daimyo who embraced firearms gained a decisive advantage over rivals, as demonstrated at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, where Oda Nobunaga's organized gun units decimated the elite Takeda cavalry. The incorporation of firearms forced samurai leaders to rethink traditional battlefield tactics and invest in training, logistics, and coordinated unit deployment. Logistics and supply also became critical factors in military success. Armies of the Sengoku period required reliable transportation of food, weapons, and reinforcements over varied terrain. Samurai commanders developed methods for efficient communication, recruitment, and supply chain management, often drawing on local populations and fortifications. These systems allowed larger, more complex armies to operate over extended campaigns, a necessity in a period marked by prolonged sieges and rapid territorial shifts. Administrative skill became as valuable as martial prowess, reflecting the broader evolution of the samurai from individual warriors to organized military administrators. The role of alliances and diplomacy was equally important. Daimyo frequently negotiated marriages, hostage exchanges, and temporary coalitions to strengthen positions or neutralize threats. Loyalty among samurai became increasingly contingent on tangible rewards, such as land, titles, and status. Failure to honor promises could lead to desertion, rebellion, or the rise of competing factions. This environment cultivated a pragmatic approach to leadership. Successful commanders balanced force with negotiation, ensuring both immediate military success and long-term political stability within their domains. Religious institutions also influenced warfare and strategy. Buddhist monasteries, particularly those of militant sects, often maintained armed forces and controlled strategic locations. Samurai commanders had to navigate these relationships carefully, as monastic armies could serve as allies or adversaries depending on circumstances. Support from temples could provide spiritual legitimacy and access to resources, while opposition could threaten supply lines or territory. The integration of religious, political, and military considerations demonstrated the multifaceted nature of samurai leadership during the period. The rise of new technologies and tactics also impacted samurai identity and ethos. While traditional weapons like the katana remained symbolic of status and martial skill, proficiency with firearms, archery, and siege tactics became essential for practical success. Commanders who adapted to technological change, trained their troops effectively, and innovated in battle often achieved dominance over less flexible rivals. This period reinforced the concept that samurai were not solely warriors by heritage, but also strategic and administrative leaders capable of integrating multiple elements, technology, logistics, and diplomacy, into effective governance. Cultural and educational developments paralleled military evolution. Samurai leaders studied strategy, history, and literature, blending practical knowledge with traditional values. Military treatises, such as those by Yamamoto Kansuki and other strategists, emphasized planning, intelligence, and the importance of disciplined coordination among units. These writings reflected the increasingly professional nature of samurai warfare and contributed to the development of leadership principles that would endure through later periods, including the unification campaigns of Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu. By the late 16th century, the innovations of this period had transformed Japanese warfare and society. Armies were larger, more organized, and equipped with advanced weapons. Castles served as centers of power, administration, and culture, and samurai leaders exercised authority through both martial and administrative skill. These changes laid the groundwork for the eventual unification of Japan, demonstrating that technological adoption, strategic planning, and effective management were essential to success in the fragmented and competitive environment of the Sengoku period. By the mid-16th century, Japan had endured nearly a century of the Warring States period. Regional daimyo wielded power independently, central authority was fragmented, and continuous warfare had reshaped society. Into this turbulent environment emerged Oda Nobunaga, a daimyo from Owari province, whose vision, military innovation, and decisive leadership would initiate the first steps toward national unification. His campaigns between 1568 and 1582 marked a turning point in the history of the samurai empire, demonstrating both the transformative power of strategy and the harsh realities of consolidating authority in a fractured political landscape. Oda Nobunaga assumed leadership of his clan in 1551 after a series of internal conflicts and the early death of his father. Known for his unconventional and sometimes ruthless methods, he quickly gained a reputation as a bold and innovative commander. Nobunaga recognized that traditional samurai warfare, reliant on cavalry and individual valor, was insufficient to dominate in the era of massed infantry and firearms introduced during the Sengoku period. From the outset, he sought to modernize his armies, combining disciplined Ashigaru infantry, mounted samurai, and the newly introduced Tanegashima firearms into cohesive, coordinated forces capable of decisive action. In 1568, Nobunaga seized Kyoto, the symbolic heart of Japan, installing Ashikaga Yoshiaki as shogun. While Yoshiaki remained nominally in power, real authority rested with Nobunaga, who used the shogun's position to legitimize his military campaigns against rival daimyo. Controlling Kyoto allowed him to influence imperial court politics, assert cultural leadership, and project power across central Japan. Nobunaga's strategy relied not only on battlefield prowess, but also on political maneuvering. He formed alliances, leveraged hostages, and manipulated court authority to consolidate control while neutralizing opposition. One of Nobunaga's defining achievements was the destruction of the warrior monks at Mount Hai in 1571. The Enryakuji Monastery, located on Mount Hai near Kyoto, had historically maintained armed forces and wielded considerable political influence. These warrior monks, or Sohei, often intervened in regional conflicts, threatening Nobunaga's consolidation efforts. In a campaign characterized by meticulous planning and overwhelming force, Nobunaga's armies encircled and burned the monastery, eliminating its military capacity and sending a clear message to other potential rivals. The action, while brutal, demonstrated his willingness to confront entrenched powers decisively and reshape the political landscape through force when necessary. Nobunaga also revolutionized battlefield tactics. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, he deployed volley fire using coordinated ranks of gunners armed with matchlock rifles. Facing the renowned cavalry of the Takeda clan, Nobunaga's disciplined infantry formations decimated mounted samurai, proving that firearms, when used strategically, could overcome traditional cavalry charges. This battle marked a turning point in Japanese military history, highlighting the effectiveness of technological adaptation, coordinated tactics, and disciplined training over reliance on individual heroism. Nobunaga's methods set new standards for warfare and were widely studied and imitated by other daimyo. In addition to military innovation, Nobunaga pursued economic and administrative reforms that strengthened his domains. He encouraged commerce, improved infrastructure, and standardized taxation to secure resources for ongoing campaigns. By promoting trade in cities like Sakai, he increased the wealth available to fund his armies, demonstrating the integration of economic policy with military strategy. Nobunaga's governance emphasized efficiency, merit, and centralized control, contrasting sharply with the fragmented, feudal arrangements typical of the Sengoku period. Despite his successes, Nobunaga's rise was not without vulnerability. In 1582, he faced betrayal from within his own ranks. Akechi Mitsuhide, one of his generals, turned against him during the Hanoji incident. Surprised by Mitsuhide's rebellion while resting in Kyoto, Nobunaga committed ritual suicide, seppuku, a samurai act preserving personal honor in the face of defeat. His death abruptly ended his campaign, leaving a power vacuum that would be filled by his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Nonetheless, Nobunaga's legacy endured. He had fundamentally reshaped Japanese military organization, demonstrated the strategic value of firearms, and laid the political and administrative foundations for unification. Culturally, Nobunaga's influence extended beyond warfare. His patronage of the arts and urban centers encouraged the development of no theater, tea ceremonies, and urban commerce, blending samurai values with cultural sophistication. He fostered an environment in which military, administrative, and cultural authority intersected, demonstrating that leadership during the Sengoku period required mastery of multiple domains, not solely battlefield skill. Nobunaga's campaigns also exemplified the evolving role of samurai in governance. The emphasis on organized, disciplined forces, economic management, and centralized authority illustrated that samurai were no longer only warriors but also administrators, strategists, and political actors. Nobunaga's methods reflected the broader trend of professionalization within the samurai class. Effectiveness, adaptability, and innovation became critical to leadership in a competitive and fragmented environment. The strategic lessons from Nobunaga's life were clear. Success depended on integrating military innovation, political acumen, and economic administration. The introduction of firearms and coordinated infantry tactics demonstrated that adaptability could overcome centuries of traditional martial doctrine. The ruthless elimination of threats, whether rival daimyo or militant religious institutions, reinforced the importance of decisive action in consolidating power. Nobunaga's campaigns also emphasized the centrality of logistics, planning, and communication in sustaining prolonged military operations. Following the sudden death of Oda Nobunaga in 1582, Japan faced another crucial phase in its Warring States period. Nobunaga's death left a power vacuum, and the fractured samurai lords, or daimyo, competed for supremacy. Into this turbulence stepped Toyotomi Hideyoshi, once a peasant-born retainer of Nobunaga, who would complete the unification of Japan and fundamentally reshape the samurai empire. Hideyoshi's rise illustrates the combination of military skill, political ingenuity, and administrative foresight necessary to consolidate authority in a nation long divided by warfare. Hideyoshi's early career reflects his remarkable adaptability. Starting as a low-ranking foot soldier under Nobunaga, he distinguished himself through intelligence, loyalty, and strategic acumen. He quickly rose through the ranks, commanding troops and managing logistical operations during campaigns. Following Nobunaga's death, Hideyoshi moved decisively to neutralize rival claimants, including the ambitious General Akechi Mitsuhide, who had betrayed Nobunaga at the Honnoji incident. Within months, Hideyoshi defeated Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki, 1582, solidifying his position as Nobunaga's heir in influence, if not formally in rank. Hideyoshi's approach combined military conquest with political negotiation. Recognizing that outright force alone could not secure lasting authority, he forged alliances with key daimyo, incorporated former rivals into his administration, and utilized hostages to ensure loyalty. These strategies reflected a nuanced understanding of human behavior, social hierarchy, and political necessity, allowing him to extend influence across central and western Japan with remarkable speed. By 1590, Hideyoshi had successfully subdued most of the country's major warlords, completing the unification process begun by Nobunaga. Administrative reforms under Hideyoshi reinforced his military achievements. One of his most significant policies was the land survey system, which meticulously recorded landholdings, agricultural productivity, and taxable income. This allowed Hideyoshi to accurately assess the wealth and resources available to his administration, facilitating the funding of armies, fortifications, and public works. By establishing centralized records, he imposed order on a previously fragmented and often arbitrary system, reducing disputes over land and taxation and enhancing the authority of the central government. A complementary policy, known as the Sword Hunt Katanagari of 1588, further solidified social and military order. Hideyoshi mandated the confiscation of weapons from peasants and non-samurai, preventing potential uprisings and ensuring that the samurai class maintained exclusive access to arms. This action reinforced a rigid social hierarchy, formally distinguishing warriors from commoners and stabilizing the new national structure. It also curtailed the ability of local insurgents to challenge the authority of established daimyo, providing a foundation for long-term peace under central control. Hideyoshi's military campaigns extended beyond internal consolidation. He sought to project Japanese power internationally, most notably in the invasions of Korea 1592 to 1598. These campaigns, initially motivated by ambition to expand influence and demonstrate military strength, ultimately proved costly and largely unsuccessful. Japanese forces faced strong resistance from Korean and Ming Chinese armies, combined with logistical challenges and attrition. While the invasions temporarily displayed the reach of Hideyoshi's authority, they exhausted resources, destabilized local governance, and left lingering diplomatic tensions. The Korean campaigns, however, also provided opportunities for samurai to refine siege tactics, naval coordination, and large-scale troop movements, reinforcing military experience across the warrior class. In addition to military and administrative achievements, Hideyoshi emphasized cultural patronage and urban development. He commissioned grand projects, including castle construction, city planning, and support for tea ceremony culture, no theater, and other arts. Notable examples include Osaka Castle, a symbol of his power, designed not only as a military fortress but also as a political and cultural center. Hideyoshi's urban projects integrated economic development with displays of authority, reinforcing the connection between governance, culture, and the samurai elite. Hideyoshi's consolidation of Japan was also marked by strategic succession planning. Although he had no natural heir at first, he designated his young son, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and established a network of trusted retainers to maintain continuity of governance. This focus on dynastic security, however, would later contribute to conflicts following his death in 1598, as ambitious daimyo and former allies vied for dominance, ultimately paving the way for Tokugawa Ieyasu's rise. The socio-political transformations initiated by Hideyoshi had enduring effects. By creating a rigid class system, centralizing taxation, and enforcing disarmament among peasants, he stabilized Japanese society after centuries of war. Samurai retained both social prestige and a monopoly on military force, while local governance became increasingly standardized under the authority of central and regional administrations. These changes reflected the broader principle that effective leadership required more than battlefield skill. It demanded organization, foresight, and the ability to integrate social, economic, and military structures into a coherent system. Hideyoshi's success also highlighted the changing nature of samurai leadership. While individual combat skill remained respected, strategic intelligence, administrative competence, and political negotiation became essential markers of authority. The professionalization of the warrior class, exemplified by disciplined infantry, effective siege operations, and coordinated campaign logistics, demonstrated the evolution of samurai from traditional horsebound warriors to managers of complex military and civil systems. The death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi in 1598 left Japan at another pivotal crossroads. While Hideyoshi had unified the country, his young son Toyotomi Hideyoshi was only 5 years old, leaving the Toyotomi administration dependent on regents and loyal daimyo. Among these figures, Tokugawa Ieyasu, a seasoned samurai leader and former ally of Hideyoshi, emerged as the most powerful and ambitious contender. Ieyasu's strategic acumen, patience, and political foresight allowed him to consolidate influence over central and eastern Japan, ultimately culminating in the decisive Battle of Sekigahara on October 21, 1600, a confrontation that would determine the future of the samurai empire for over 2.5 centuries. Tokugawa Ieyasu's rise to power was built upon decades of calculated alliances, territorial expansion, and the careful management of rival factions. Born in 1543 in Mikawa Province, Ieyasu grew up amid the chaos of the Sengoku period, initially serving as a hostage to ensure his family's survival. These early experiences shaped his approach to leadership, cautious, patient, and strategic rather than impulsive. Ieyasu's ability to navigate political danger, form alliances, and balance loyalty with pragmatism allowed him to survive and thrive in a highly competitive environment dominated by ambitious daimyo. Following Hideyoshi's death, Japan fractured into two major factions. The Western Army, loyal to the Toyotomi legacy and led by Ishida Mitsunari, sought to maintain the Toyotomi political order and assert authority over central Japan. The Eastern Army, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu, leveraged both military strength and strategic alliances with other influential daimyo. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation that would determine the hierarchy of Japan's warrior elite. Sekigahara, located in central Honshu, became the chosen battleground, strategically positioned to control access to the capital, Kyoto, and the surrounding provinces. The Battle of Sekigahara was not only a contest of armies, but a demonstration of Ieyasu's mastery of strategy and diplomacy. He meticulously coordinated movements, secured intelligence on enemy positions, and negotiated the loyalty of key daimyo whose allegiances were uncertain. Several commanders within the Western Army were persuaded, bribed, or coerced into switching sides during the battle, reflecting the fluid nature of samurai loyalty in the period. These tactical and political maneuvers underscored the evolution of samurai warfare. Success depended as much on strategy, negotiation, and manipulation as on personal valor or battlefield skill. On the day of the battle, Ieyasu's forces numbered approximately 70,000 men, facing a Western army roughly equal in size, but less cohesively commanded. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, involving coordinated cavalry charges, infantry volleys, and the strategic use of firearms, an innovation increasingly standard since Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. Ieyasu's command of reserves, flexibility in adapting to battlefield developments, and exploitation of defections among enemy ranks enabled a decisive victory. By evening, the Western Army had been routed, Ishida Mitsunari captured, and resistance to Tokugawa authority effectively dismantled. The consequences of Sekigahara were transformative. Ieyasu's triumph allowed him to consolidate control over Japan, neutralize rival daimyo, and secure loyalty through the redistribution of land and titles. Territories were carefully allocated to ensure balance, reward allies, and deter rebellion. Former opponents were either subdued, exiled, or absorbed into the new Tokugawa order, establishing a network of Han, semi-autonomous domains under direct shogunal oversight. This system balanced regional authority with centralized control, creating a framework that would sustain political stability for over 250 years. In 1603, Ieyasu received formal recognition from Emperor Go-Yōzei, who appointed him Sei Taishogun, officially founding the Tokugawa Shogunate. This marked the beginning of a new era in Japanese history: centralized governance, prolonged peace, and a transformation of the samurai class. While samurai retained their status as warriors, the long-term absence of large-scale conflict would gradually shift their focus from battlefield engagement to administrative, bureaucratic, and ceremonial functions. Sekigahara thus represented both the culmination of the unification process and the start of a societal transition within the samurai empire. The Tokugawa victory also reshaped military, economic, and social structures. The shogunate implemented a system of alternate attendance, Sankenkotai, requiring daimyo to spend alternating years in Edo and their home provinces. This policy centralized political oversight, reduced the likelihood of rebellion, and stimulated economic development along transportation routes. Samurai, meanwhile, increasingly assumed administrative responsibilities within domains, balancing martial duties with governance. Castles, previously centers of military activity, evolved into administrative hubs and symbols of local authority. Ieyasu's victory also reinforced the importance of strategic patience, long-term planning, and political negotiation in samurai leadership. The battle demonstrated that personal valor, while still respected, was insufficient for national dominance. Effective leadership required foresight, coalition building, and the integration of political and military power. By combining battlefield innovation with strategic diplomacy, Ieyasu established a governance model that ensured stability, deterred rebellion, and institutionalized the authority of the shogunate. Culturally, the Tokugawa victory initiated a period in which arts, education, and social norms flourished under centralized control. Although military activity declined during the Edo period, the samurai class retained influence as patrons, administrators, and moral exemplars. Literature, theater, philosophy, and urban culture evolved within the framework established by Tokugawa political and social policies, reflecting the broader interplay between martial authority and cultural development that had characterized the samurai empire throughout its history. Following Tokugawa Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara in 1600 and his formal appointment as Sei Taishogun in 1603, Japan entered a prolonged period of stability and centralized rule that would last over 250 years. This era, known as the Edo period, was defined by strict political control, hierarchical social structures, economic regulation, and cultural flourishing. The Tokugawa shogunate consolidated power through innovative governance, rigorous oversight of daimyo, and policies that isolated Japan from foreign influence. The establishment of the Tokugawa order fundamentally transformed the samurai empire, shifting the samurai class from active warfare to administration, law enforcement, and moral leadership. At the core of Tokugawa governance was the centralization of authority. Although daimyo retained nominal control over their provinces, they were required to pledge loyalty to the shogunate and adhere to policies designed to prevent rebellion. One of the most effective mechanisms was the Senkin-kotai system, or alternate attendance. Under this system, daimyo were mandated to spend every other year residing in Edo, modern Tokyo, while their families remained as hostages to ensure compliance. This policy simultaneously centralized political oversight, reduced the likelihood of insurrection, and stimulated economic growth through travel and the development of roads, inns, and urban centers. It also allowed the shogunate to monitor daimyo alliances and maintain a balance of power across Japan's regions. The Tokugawa government also restructured the social hierarchy, codifying a four-tiered system: samurai at the top, followed by peasants, artisans, and merchants. Samurai retained exclusive rights to bear arms and occupy military and administrative roles, while peasants were tasked with food production, artisans with crafts, and merchants with trade and finance. This rigid structure enforced social stability, ensured the allocation of resources, and preserved the samurai's dominance in political and military matters. Although samurai were no longer frequently engaged in battle, their role as administrators, judges, and tax collectors became essential to the functioning of the state. Economic regulation was another cornerstone of Tokugawa policy. The shogunate imposed strict oversight of trade, land management, and production to prevent social unrest and ensure stability. Agricultural productivity was carefully monitored, and land surveys maintained accurate records of taxable wealth. Urban centers, particularly Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, became hubs of commerce, hosting markets, workshops, and financial institutions. The shogunate encouraged internal trade but restricted foreign interaction, enforcing a policy known as sakoku, or national isolation, from the 1630s onward. This policy limited contact to Dutch and Chinese merchants in Nagasaki and prohibited Japanese citizens from traveling abroad, controlling the influence of foreign powers while fostering internal economic self-sufficiency. Within this controlled environment, the samurai class underwent a profound transformation. With the absence of large-scale warfare, many samurai transitioned from warriors to bureaucrats, administrators, and educators. Mastery of swordsmanship remained a symbol of status, but the practical skills required were often civil rather than martial. Samurai served as local magistrates, tax collectors, and enforcers of the shogunate's policies. This evolution emphasized the principle that authority rested on discipline, loyalty, and competence in governance as much as on battlefield skill. Training in administration, law, and classical studies became a significant part of samurai education, reflecting the adaptation of a warrior elite to a prolonged era of peace. The Tokugawa order also maintained political stability through strategic control of alliances. Daimyo were classified based on their relationship to the shogunate. Fudai daimyo, hereditary allies loyal before Sekigahara, held key positions within the administration. Tozuma daimyo, who submitted only after the battle, were kept at a distance from central authority and closely monitored. This classification allowed the shogunate to consolidate influence while minimizing the threat posed by powerful regional lords. Regular inspections, mandated reporting, and the hostages maintained through Senkenkotai ensured ongoing oversight and deterred insubordination. Cultural and intellectual life flourished under the Tokugawa order, as political stability provided a secure environment for artistic and scholarly development. The Edo period saw the expansion of urban culture, including kabuki theater, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, poetry, and literature. Education became more widely accessible, with the proliferation of schools and academies serving both samurai and commoners. Neo-Confucianism and Zen Buddhism influenced moral and administrative philosophies, emphasizing loyalty, discipline, and social harmony. These cultural developments reinforced the ideological legitimacy of the shogunate, integrating moral, educational, and administrative structures into the governance of Japan. Military innovation continued, but in a restrained and administrative form. Samurai retained expertise in traditional weapons, archery, and swordsmanship, but large-scale campaigns became rare. Firearms and siege tactics, which had revolutionized warfare during the Sengoku period, were maintained primarily for defensive purposes or ceremonial displays. Castles, once central to active warfare, became administrative hubs and symbols of authority. The integration of military tradition with bureaucratic function exemplified the adaptability of the samurai class to the demands of a centralized and peaceful society. The Tokugawa order also established legal frameworks and regulations to maintain stability. Laws addressed land disputes, tax collection, commercial activity, and criminal offenses. The shogunate's emphasis on codified law reinforced hierarchical authority and provided mechanisms for the resolution of conflicts without resorting to armed conflict. Local officials, typically samurai, enforced these laws, further embedding the warrior class into administrative and judicial roles. This systematic governance demonstrated that the samurai empire under Tokugawa control had transitioned from a society defined by continuous warfare to one organized around law, order, and bureaucratic efficiency. Foreign relations during this period were tightly controlled. The Sakoku policy limited external influence, preventing colonization or interference from European powers while permitting controlled trade with select nations. The Dutch, confined to Dejima and Nagasaki, and limited Chinese merchants facilitated commerce and the exchange of knowledge without threatening domestic authority. This cautious approach allowed the Tokugawa shogunate to modernize selectively, absorb technology, and maintain sovereignty, all while avoiding destabilizing foreign entanglements. The prolonged stability of the Tokugawa shogunate, from 1603 to 1853, created an unprecedented environment for social, economic, and cultural development in Japan. The cessation of large-scale warfare, the consolidation of centralized authority, and the rigid hierarchical system allowed not only the samurai class, but also peasants, artisans, and merchants to focus on trade, craftsmanship, education, and culture. This era, known as the Edo period, witnessed the transformation of Japanese society, with the samurai empire evolving from a militarized society into a highly organized, bureaucratic, and culturally sophisticated civilization. Central to Edo society was the samurai class, which, while losing much of its wartime function, retained a privileged position in governance, administration, and social hierarchy. Samurai served as magistrates, tax collectors, educators, and advisors to daimyo, enforcing laws and regulations throughout the domains. They also maintained the moral and ideological framework of the era, embodying principles of loyalty, discipline, and ethical conduct derived from Bushidō, the evolving samurai code of conduct. As their military role diminished, the samurai increasingly engaged in literary, educational, and ceremonial pursuits, reflecting the adaptation of a warrior class to peacetime responsibilities. Urban centers grew dramatically during this period. Cities such as Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto became hubs of economic activity, commerce, and culture. Edo, in particular, expanded rapidly to become one of the largest cities in the world by the 18th century. Merchants, although formally ranked below samurai in the social hierarchy, amassed wealth through trade, banking, and artisan production, creating a dynamic urban culture. The growth of these cities facilitated the exchange of ideas, goods, and cultural practices, fostering innovation in arts, literature, and public entertainment. The Edo period also saw a remarkable flourishing of arts and culture, often referred to as the Jinroku culture, in its peak decades of the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Popular forms of entertainment emerged, including kabuki theater, which combined dramatic storytelling with music, dance, and elaborate costumes. Puppet theater, or bunraku, also became widely popular, offering intricate narratives performed with skillful manipulation of large puppets accompanied by music and recitation. These forms of entertainment were accessible to both urban and rural audiences, reflecting the integration of culture into everyday life. Literature and education experienced significant expansion. The proliferation of schools, known as terrakoya, provided basic literacy and numeracy for commoners, while samurai and elites studied Confucian classics, poetry, and philosophy. The introduction and adaptation of Neo-Confucianism during this period shaped the moral and social principles of governance and daily life, emphasizing hierarchy, filial piety, loyalty, and duty. These teachings reinforced the Tokugawa social order, providing an ideological foundation for the samurai class and broader society. Visual arts flourished as well. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints depicted urban life, kabuki actors, landscapes, and scenes from historical narratives. These prints became widely available, allowing art to reach a broader public beyond the elite. Painting, calligraphy, and decorative crafts continued to develop under the patronage of both samurai and wealthy merchant classes. The arts were not merely aesthetic. They functioned as instruments for social cohesion, education, and the reinforcement of moral and cultural norms. Religious and philosophical thought adapted to the changing social environment. Zen Buddhism continued to influence aesthetics, discipline, and meditation practices, while Neo-Confucian principles guided education, governance, and social conduct. Shinto practices remained important, particularly in local rituals and festivals, reinforcing communal identity and continuity with traditional beliefs. The integration of religion, philosophy, and practical governance provided a moral and ethical framework that supported the shogunate's centralized authority and the orderly conduct of society. The Edo peace also saw advancements in infrastructure and economic systems. Roads, bridges, and canals were maintained to facilitate travel, trade, and communication between domains. The growth of markets and towns along these routes encouraged local specialization, commercial exchange, and economic interdependence. Agricultural productivity was enhanced through improved The response to Perry's arrival catalyzed intense political debate within Japan. Shogunate officials were divided between appeasement, which favored diplomatic concessions and trade agreements, and resistance, advocating the expulsion of foreigners under the slogan Sano Joy, meaning revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. This ideological split mirrored broader societal tensions between traditionalist factions, who sought to preserve Japanese customs and autonomy, and reformist factions, who recognized the need for modernization to avoid colonization or coercion by Western powers. The arrival of the Black Ships thus destabilized the political equilibrium that had sustained the Tokugawa order for more than 2 centuries. In 1854, under increasing pressure, the Tokugawa Shogunate signed the Convention of Kanagawa with the United States. This treaty opened Japanese ports at Shimoda and Hakodate for limited trade, allowed American ships to refuel and resupply, and established consular relations. Though technically a diplomatic agreement, it was widely perceived within Japan as an unequal treaty that undermined national sovereignty. The perception of weakness emboldened reformist daimyo in southern domains, particularly Satsuma and Chashu, who began to organize against shogunate authority and assert allegiance to the emperor, envisioning a restoration of imperial power. The ensuing years witnessed a rapid erosion of shogunate authority. Unequal treaties followed with other Western powers, including Britain, France, and Russia, further eroding confidence in the shogunate's ability to govern and defend Japan. Internal dissent grew as samurai from both the eastern and western domains debated the future of Japan's political structure. Economic challenges, including famine, inflation, and corruption, compounded the crisis, weakening the central authority and providing fertile ground for political activism and rebellion. These developments signaled the beginning of the end for Tokugawa rule. Reformist domains leveraged this instability to consolidate power and form alliances. The Satsuma-Chashu alliance, initially uneasy due to historical rivalries, united around the goal of overthrowing the shogunate and restoring imperial authority. These domains undertook military modernization, adopting Western firearms, artillery, and naval technology, preparing to confront Tokugawa forces in what would become the Boshin War, 1868 to 1869. Their strategic vision combined respect for traditional samurai principles with pragmatic adaptation of new technology, reflecting the continued evolution of the samurai class even as the old order faced collapse. In 1868, conflict reached its climax. The Boshin War began as reformist and imperial forces marched against shogunate strongholds, confronting Tokugawa loyalists across multiple provinces. Despite a long-standing reputation for discipline and strategic skill, shogunate forces struggled against better-armed and more adaptable opposition. Key battles, including engagements in Edo and the northern regions, demonstrated both the enduring martial skill of samurai warriors and the decisive advantage of modern weaponry and coordinated military organization. Ultimately, the reformist forces captured Edo, the political heart of the Tokugawa shogunate, signaling the effective end of samurai governance under the shogun. The resignation of Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the last shogun, marked the formal collapse of centralized Tokugawa authority. The imperial court, restored to political prominence, assumed control, initiating the Meiji Restoration, which aimed to modernize Japan along Western lines while preserving national identity. The fall of the shogunate signified not only a political transformation, but also a fundamental reorganization of the samurai class. Samurai were gradually stripped of their privileges, stipends, and exclusive rights to bear arms. While many initially resisted these reforms, the practical necessity of modernization and national unity eventually led to their acceptance or adaptation within the emerging Meiji state. The arrival of the black ships thus represents both an external shock and a catalyst for internal reform. The encounter with Western powers exposed the limitations of Japan's centuries-long isolation and the rigid structures of the Tokugawa Shogunate. Samurai, who had once dominated warfare and administration, were confronted with the need to adapt to new forms of military and political organization. This period illustrates a critical transition in the samurai empire, from a warrior-led society with feudal stability to a modern nation-state, incorporating Western technology, governance, and military practices. Culturally and socially, the late Tokugawa period and the transition to Meiji rule reflected the tension between tradition and innovation. Samurai ideals, including Bushidō, loyalty, and honor, continued to shape the conduct of individuals and military units. At the same time, reformist domains emphasized practical adaptation, technological advancement, and strategic modernization. This balance between enduring values and necessary reform allowed Japan to navigate a period of unprecedented external pressure and internal transformation, preserving a sense of national identity while embracing the requirements of modern statehood. The fall of the Tokugawa Shogunate in 1868 marked the formal end of the samurai empire in its classical, feudal sense. The Meiji Restoration, initiated by the restored Emperor Meiji, aimed to consolidate power under the imperial court and modernize Japan along Western lines. The transition was not instantaneous. It involved profound political, social, military, and economic reforms that dismantled the centuries-old feudal hierarchy and replaced it with a centralized, modern nation-state. Despite this dramatic transformation, the legacy of the samurai endured, influencing Japan's governance, military culture, and national identity well into the 20th century. The first major reform targeting the samurai class was the abolition of their hereditary privileges. Samurai had long enjoyed exclusive rights to bear arms, govern land, and collect stipends. Beginning in the early 1870s, the Meiji government systematically stripped these privileges. The Heian Edict of 1876 officially prohibited samurai from carrying swords in public, symbolically ending the physical embodiment of the warrior class. Stipends and land grants, previously guaranteed by feudal lords, were converted to government bonds, often at values that failed to match the economic security they once provided. This financial and legal restructuring forced former samurai to seek new roles in commerce, administration, education, or the modern military. Despite the formal dissolution of their social status, samurai ideals remained embedded in Japanese society. Bushidō principles, including loyalty, discipline, honor, and courage, continued to shape behavior, especially in the military and civil service. Many former samurai assumed leadership roles in the newly formed Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, bringing with them training, discipline, and organizational skills honed over centuries of martial tradition. The integration of Bushidō into military ethos contributed to Japan's effectiveness in conflicts such as the Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, and the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. demonstrating the enduring influence of samurai culture even in a modernized context. The Meiji era also saw the transformation of samurai into educators, bureaucrats, and cultural leaders. Their training in administration, literacy, ethics, and philosophy allowed many to excel in government service, legal systems, and educational institutions. Former samurai became influential in shaping the modern Japanese state, ensuring continuity of governance and stability during a period of rapid modernization. The intellectual and moral frameworks they carried from Bushido continued to guide societal expectations, emphasizing responsibility, service, and disciplined conduct in civic life. Culturally, samurai ideals continued to influence literature, art, and public imagination. Historical accounts, biographies, and treatises celebrated samurai valor, loyalty, and ethical conduct, ensuring that these principles remained part of Japan's collective memory. Texts such as Hagakure and Yamagashoko's writings were studied not merely as historical curiosities, but as practical guides to conduct, shaping attitudes toward leadership, honor, and social responsibility. Even as Japan embraced Western technology, legal systems, and industrialization, the ethical and philosophical legacies of the samurai provided a cultural continuity that helped anchor a rapidly changing society. The Meiji government also incorporated selective elements of samurai military tradition into the modernization of Japan's armed forces. Discipline, hierarchical command structures, and loyalty to superiors were emphasized, while Western technology and strategy were adopted. Former samurai officers trained conscripts, established academies, and developed doctrines that fused traditional martial ethos with contemporary military science. This integration of the samurai spirit into modern institutions demonstrated the adaptability and enduring relevance of warrior values in a society no longer defined by feudal warfare. In addition to military and governmental influence, samurai ethics informed the development of modern Japanese education and civil service. Schools emphasized discipline, moral instruction, and respect for hierarchy, reflecting the enduring principles of Bushido. Former samurai served as teachers, administrators, and examiners, transmitting both practical knowledge and ethical frameworks to new generations. These contributions facilitated the rapid development of a literate, organized, and socially cohesive population capable of supporting industrialization, centralized governance, and national defense. Economically, the transition forced former samurai to engage in new forms of employment. Many entered business, trade, or professional fields, bringing organizational skills, discipline, and ethical standards to emerging industries. Their adaptation exemplified a broader societal shift in which traditional elites integrated into a modern economy, ensuring that the values and organizational practices of the samurai empire continued to shape Japanese institutions even as formal feudal structures disappeared. Socially, the legacy of the samurai persisted in public consciousness and civic identity. Rituals, ceremonies, and moral exemplars maintained symbolic importance, reinforcing ideals of honor, duty, and loyalty. Samurai achievements, historical battles, and ethical narratives were commemorated in museums, literature, and public discourse, cultivating a sense of national pride and continuity. Even as swords were retired and stipends eliminated, the cultural and ethical imprint of the samurai provided a foundation for modern Japanese identity, linking traditions with contemporary national values. The abolition of samurai privileges was accompanied by broader social reforms under Meiji modernization. The class system was officially dismantled, creating legal equality among citizens and enabling social mobility. The military became a national institution rather than a hereditary privilege. Education was standardized, and industrialization redefined economic opportunities. While these reforms ended the formal structure of the samurai empire, they preserved the ethical, cultural, and organizational legacies that had sustained Japanese society for centuries. By the late 19th century, the samurai class had been fully integrated into the modern state. Many former samurai excelled as politicians, military officers, educators, and business leaders. Their training, ethos, and adaptability allowed them to influence Japan's rapid modernization while maintaining continuity with the ethical and cultural frameworks of the past. Bushidō, once a code for battlefield conduct, became a guiding philosophy for leadership, discipline, and civic responsibility, ensuring that the samurai empire's legacy endured long after the swords had been sheathed. The history of the samurai empire spans nearly 7 centuries from the outbreak of the Genpei War in 1180 to the Meiji Restoration in 1868, charting the evolution of Japan from a politically fragmented land to a centralized, modernizing state. The samurai empire was never a formal empire. Rather, it was a governance system defined by the dominance of the warrior class, whose influence shaped politics, culture, military organization, and societal norms. The rise of the samurai began in the late Heian period, when provincial landowners formed armed bands to defend estates as the central imperial authority weakened. The rivalry between the Taira and Minamoto clans culminated in the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, during which Minamoto no Yoritomo's forces decisively defeated the Taira. This victory ended centuries of court dominance and established the precedent of military leadership as the basis of political authority. In 1192, the establishment of the Kamakura Shogunate formalized samurai governance under Yoritomo as shogun, instituting a feudal hierarchy based on loyalty and land tenure. Despite successfully repelling the Mongol invasions in 1274 and 1281, the shogunate struggled with economic strain, leading to its eventual collapse in 1333. The brief Meiji Restoration failed to reconcile imperial authority with samurai expectations, paving the way for Ashikaga Takauji to found the Muromachi shogunate, 1336 to 1573. This period combined cultural flourishing with political instability, culminating in the Unin War, 1467 to 1477, which plunged Japan into the Sengoku, warring states, period, marked by fragmented authority and near-constant regional warfare. During the Sengoku period, samurai warfare and military technology evolved dramatically. Fortified castles, massed infantry, a shigeru, and imported firearms, tanegashima, transformed combat, emphasizing strategy, logistics, and organization over individual heroism. Leaders such as Oda Nobunaga, 1568 to 1582, initiated campaigns to unify Japan, modernized armies, and dismantled entrenched Buddhist military powers, laying the groundwork for national consolidation. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 1582 to 1600, completed unification, enforcing a rigid class structure, disarming the peasantry, and implementing comprehensive land surveys, while his costly Korean campaigns exposed the limits of military expansion. Following Hideyoshi's death, Tokugawa Ieyasu triumphed at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, establishing the Tokugawa Shogunate, 1603 to 1853. The Tokugawa rule brought peace and stability through centralized governance, strict social hierarchy, and the Sankenkotai system, which ensured daimyo loyalty. Isolationist policies, sakoku, restricted foreign influence, while the samurai transitioned from warriors to bureaucrats, administrators, and moral exemplars. Economic growth, urbanization, and cultural flourishing defined the Edo period, giving rise to kabuki theater, ukiyo-e art, haiku poetry, and widespread literacy, with Neo-Confucian and Zen principles shaping governance and societal ethics. The Edo peace also saw the codification of Bushidō, the ethical and moral framework of the samurai. Loyalty, honor, courage, and discipline became central to samurai identity, guiding behavior in both administrative and personal contexts. Writings by Yamaga Soko and Yamamoto Tsunetomo emphasized intellectual cultivation alongside martial training, preserving the warrior ethos even as the samurai lost battlefield relevance. Bushido provided social cohesion, justified hierarchical authority, and ensured the samurai's continued influence on Japanese culture, governance, and morality. By the mid-19th century, the arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's Black Ships, 1853, exposed the technological and military weaknesses of the Tokugawa Shogunate. Unequal treaties with Western powers destabilized the government and fueled political activism among reformist domains like Satsuma and Chashu. These domains modernized militarily and allied with imperial loyalists, culminating in the Boshin War, 1868 to 1869, which decisively ended Tokugawa rule. The resignation of Tokugawa Yoshinobu restored imperial authority, marking the formal conclusion of samurai-led governance. Following the Meiji Restoration, the samurai class was systematically abolished. The Heitoriai Edict, 1876, prohibited sword carrying in public, stipends were replaced with bonds, and social privileges were eliminated. Yet, the values, training, and ethical principles of the samurai persisted. Former samurai integrated into the modern military, government, education, and industry, transmitting Bushido principles into new social and institutional contexts. Loyalty, discipline, and honor continued to influence Japan's military ethos, administrative practices, and civic life well into the 20th century. In sum, the samurai empire was defined less by territorial conquests than by the institutional, cultural, and ethical dominance of the warrior class. From the Jinpei War, 1180, to the Meiji Restoration, 1868, Japan experienced the transformation of the samurai from battlefield elites into administrators, educators, and moral exemplars. They guided the evolution of governance, culture, society, and military organization, leaving a legacy that extended beyond the formal end of feudal rule. While the swords were retired and privileges abolished, the spirit of the samurai endured, shaping Japanese identity, values, and institutions long after the collapse of the samurai empire.